My parents threw me out of the house, all because my so-called golden child sister couldn't stand having me around. About 10 years ago, my whole life got turned upside down when my family, mostly because of my sister Vanessa, decided I wasn't welcome in their home anymore. And the crazy part? The reason they gave was that I had somehow betrayed them just by figuring out a way to pay for my college tuition without asking them for help. I was only 18 at the time, getting ready to start college, and suddenly I had nowhere to live. The whole mess started because of Vanessa, the golden child of the family who had a real talent for making me seem like I was worth next to nothing compared to her. Vanessa is 4 years older than me, and even when we were little kids, it was painfully obvious she was our parents' favorite. And I don't mean just a little favoritism either. I'm talking about full-blown obsession. My parents practically worshipped the ground she walked on. If Vanessa got an A in school, they'd act like she'd just cured cancer and deserved a parade down Main Street. But if I got an A, the reaction was more like, "Oh, that's nice. So what's for dinner?" That pretty much sums it up. Growing up like that kind of messes with your head. I eventually learned that it didn't really matter what I achieved because Vanessa would always shine brighter in my parents' eyes. When she got accepted into some prestigious business school, my parents acted like the whole thing was a national event. To them, she wasn't just their daughter. She was some kind of genius prodigy. They paid for absolutely everything she needed. Tuition, a nice apartment, expensive clothes, you name it, they covered it. Meanwhile, I kept my head down and slowly came to terms with the idea that I'd have to build my future on my own. So when I got accepted into a respected university in the UK to study history, I honestly thought maybe, just maybe, my parents might finally support me a little. But nope, that wasn't happening. They told me flat out that they couldn't afford to pay for my tuition. And look, I understand that college costs a lot of money. What really got under my skin, though, was the fact that they wouldn't even co-sign a loan for me. I wasn't asking them to pay for everything. All I wanted was a little help so I wouldn't spend the rest of my life buried in debt. But they refused, and we argued about it constantly. Their explanation? We already paid for Vanessa's college, so now we need to think about our own future. On top of that, they were planning to start some small business around that time, and apparently every last dollar of their savings was going into that. So there I was, completely stuck. I didn't want to lose my chance to attend that university, but it felt like my parents were deliberately putting obstacles in my way. They had no problem pouring money into Vanessa's life, but when it came to helping me, suddenly they were all about being careful and financially responsible. I really needed help, and it became painfully obvious that my parents weren't going to give it to me. So with no other options left, I reached out to my Aunt Margaret. Margaret is my dad's older sister, and honestly, she's nothing like my parents. She's a neurosurgeon and extremely successful, probably far more accomplished than either of them, but she's also one of the most down-to-earth people you'll ever meet. There had always been this weird tension between her and my parents. Whenever we were all together at family events, they'd act polite on the surface, but I could always sense some bitterness underneath. I think my parents resented how successful she had become. My dad especially hated the feeling that his sister outshined him. At first, I really didn't want to involve her in my situation, but I was desperate, and I didn't know what else to do. So one day I called her and asked if she might be willing to help me cover my tuition. She didn't hesitate for even a second. Her response was basically, "Of course I'll help you. Why didn't you come to me sooner?" But there was one big problem. I was terrified that my dad would find out. If he discovered that I had gone behind his back and asked his sister for money, he would absolutely lose his mind. So I begged Margaret to keep everything between us. For a while, things seemed okay. I thought I had managed to pull it off. My tuition was taken care of, and I was getting ready to leave for school. That's when Vanessa decided to destroy everything. Even now, I still have no idea how she found out that Aunt Margaret was helping me. But somehow she did. And because she's Vanessa, she couldn't just ignore it and move on. She had to turn it into this massive, dramatic scandal. One night, I came home after hanging out with some friends, and the moment I walked in the door, I could tell something wasn't right. All of my belongings were packed into boxes. Every single thing I owned, my clothes, my books, even my bedding, was sitting there ready to go. My parents were sitting in the living room, and Vanessa was standing nearby with this smug, satisfied grin on her face. It honestly felt like I had walked into some kind of twisted family intervention. My dad didn't waste any time. He threw a stack of printed papers at me and barked, "Explain this." At first I had no idea what he was talking about. But when I picked up the papers and started reading them, my stomach dropped. Vanessa had completely lost her mind. She had created fake email conversations between me and Aunt Margaret. In those messages, it looked like I was betraying my own family by leaking information about the business my parents were planning to start, basically selling them out in exchange for Margaret paying my tuition. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Vanessa had somehow gotten into my laptop, found real emails between Margaret and me, and then manipulated them using Photoshop or some other program. She twisted everything to make it look like I had betrayed my family. I was completely stunned. I tried to explain that the emails were fake, that she had edited them, that none of it was real. But my parents didn't even bother listening. They just stood there shaking their heads, saying things like, "We trusted you, and you stabbed us in the back." Nothing I said made any difference. They believed Vanessa. Of course they did. They always believed her. At that moment it felt like I didn't exist to them anymore. Then they told me to take my things and leave the house immediately. Just like that, I was kicked out of my own home over a lie. I begged them to reconsider. The last thing I wanted was to become a burden on Aunt Margaret, especially after she had already been generous enough to pay for my tuition. But my parents didn't care. In their eyes, I was a traitor, and they wanted nothing to do with me. And that was the end of it. I walked out of that house with only the clothes I was wearing and a few boxes of my belongings, and I went straight to Aunt Margaret's place. Honestly, I don't know what would have happened to me if she hadn't been there. She welcomed me in without hesitation and treated me like I truly belonged, something I honestly hadn't felt in years. While my parents were busy putting Vanessa on a pedestal and focusing on their business plans, Margaret was the only person who actually cared about me. And for that, I'll always be grateful. But even now, I can't forget that night. Walking into my house and seeing all my things packed into boxes. Watching my parents stare at me like I was some kind of criminal. And seeing Vanessa standing there with that smug look on her face, completely satisfied because she had won. So there I was, standing on Aunt Margaret's doorstep with my entire life packed into boxes, still trying to understand what had just happened. The whole thing felt unreal, like some kind of nightmare. I mean, how do you go from thinking you're part of a family to suddenly being homeless in the span of a single evening? It was surreal, but at the same time, I can't say I was entirely shocked. My parents had always made it clear that Vanessa came first. I guess I just never imagined they would push things this far. Margaret, who I honestly think of as an angel, welcomed me without hesitation. She didn't interrogate me or demand a bunch of explanations. She simply saw that I was hurting and told me that her home was my home for as long as I needed it. That kind of kindness hit me hard, because in that moment I realized something painful. I had never experienced that kind of warmth from my own parents. So I moved in with her. At first it felt strange waking up in her guest room, looking around at a house that wasn't the one I grew up in. But little by little, it started to feel more like home than my parents' house ever had. Margaret and I grew closer over time. We talked about a lot of things, life, family, everything. And as it turns out, Aunt Margaret knew far more about my parents and their nonsense than I had ever realized. Margaret had actually been keeping her distance from my parents for years. The only time she ever really saw them was at family gatherings, and even then it was mostly because she felt obligated to show up. One evening she told me something that honestly shocked me. According to her, my dad's resentment toward her had started long before I was even born. Apparently Margaret had always been the one doing better in life. She went to medical school, built a successful career, and married a wonderful man, though sadly he passed away much too young. She kept moving forward with her life despite that loss. My dad, on the other hand, was doing fine, but not nearly at the same level. Margaret explained that every time the two of them saw each other, my dad would start acting strangely competitive. Over the years, their relationship slowly turned into this silent contest about who looked more successful in front of the rest of the family. Instead of simply being proud of his sister, my dad let his jealousy grow. And it wasn't only about their careers. My dad felt like he was always standing in Margaret's shadow. In money, social status, pretty much every part of life. Looking back, Margaret believed that bitterness eventually spilled over into how my dad treated me. She said she had figured out what was going on years earlier, but she kept quiet because she didn't want to cause more problems for me. But once I started living with her, she finally decided to tell me everything. It felt like she was helping me piece together parts of my life that had never made sense before. All those moments when my parents acted like my achievements didn't matter. All the times they went out of their way to support Vanessa, no matter what she did. In the end, it all came down to this strange family dynamic that I never even knew existed. Living with Margaret was honestly great. But even though things were better, I couldn't fully relax. Part of me kept expecting my phone to ring. I kept imagining my parents calling, or Vanessa suddenly showing up at the door, or maybe, just maybe, someone apologizing for what had happened. But that call never came. Days passed, then weeks, and there was nothing. Not a single message. Not one phone call. At first I was furious. I mean really furious. I couldn't wrap my head around how they could just erase me from their lives like I didn't matter at all. But after a while, that anger slowly faded into something else. Eventually I just felt numb. It was almost like my brain shut down my emotions just so I could keep functioning and move forward. Through all of that, Margaret was incredible. She never pressured me to talk about the situation unless I wanted to. She gave me space and let me work through things at my own pace. She even helped me get everything ready for school, organizing my documents, making sure I had everything packed before leaving for the UK. Honestly, I don't think I could have made it through that time without her. But even with her support, the silence from my parents was overwhelming. You'd think that after throwing your kid out of the house, you might at least check in to see if they're okay. But apparently that wasn't something my parents were interested in. About a month after everything happened, I finally got a message. It was from Vanessa. I remember that moment perfectly because the text sounded exactly like something she would write. It said, "Hope you're doing okay. By the way, don't leave your laptop lying around." That was it. No apology. No acknowledgement of what she had done. Just a smug little reminder that she had been the one responsible for getting me kicked out. I stared at the screen while my blood started to boil. She was clearly mocking me. I didn't respond. There was no point. Vanessa wasn't the type of person who ever felt guilty about anything. In her mind, she had won some twisted little competition, and that was all that mattered. For a moment, I thought about sending back a sarcastic reply, but I knew that would only give her the reaction she wanted. So instead, I blocked her number and tried to move on. That wasn't easy. Every time my phone buzzed, part of me still hoped it would be a message from my parents. Maybe my mom reaching out to say she regretted everything. Or even my dad sending one of those stiff emails pretending everything was normal. But no, nothing. Just silence. Over the next few months, Margaret and I settled into a routine together. She stopped feeling like just an aunt and became something much more important in my life. She was my confidant, my friend, and honestly the only real family I had left. As time went on, I started to see my parents more clearly for who they really were. They had spent so many years focusing all their energy on Vanessa, trying to turn her into their version of a perfect daughter, that they completely ignored everything else. And deep down I had a feeling that someday Vanessa would eventually mess things up. When that happened, it would probably be too late for them to fix the damage they had done. Right around the time I was preparing to leave for the UK, I got another message. This one was from my dad. It was short and straight to the point. "Good luck in the UK." That was the entire message. No apology. No explanation. Nothing. After everything that had happened, those 4 words felt like a slap across the face. I didn't even know what I could possibly say back. So I didn't respond. I just deleted the message and tried to push it out of my mind. On the day I left for the UK, Margaret drove me to the airport. Before I went through security, she hugged me and told me how proud she was of me. She said she knew I was going to do great things in life. Hearing that nearly knocked the wind out of me. It was the first time anyone in my family had ever said something like that to me. When I got on that plane, it felt like I wasn't just leaving my hometown behind. I was leaving behind the version of myself that had spent years trying to earn my parents' approval. At that point, I made a decision. I didn't need them anymore. I had Margaret. I had my future. And I had myself. If my parents ever wanted to reach out, fine. But I wasn't going to waste my energy chasing people who clearly didn't care about me. I was done with that. Life in the UK actually turned out to be great. I settled into college, made some good friends, and for the first time in a long time, my family wasn't constantly on my mind. I wouldn't say I forgot about them completely. That's probably impossible, but they stopped dominating my thoughts the way they used to. Instead, I focused on my studies, planning my future, and learning how to enjoy life without the constant pressure that came from living in my parents' shadow. Of course, just when everything finally started going smoothly, something had to happen to shake things up again. After finishing college, I eventually returned to my hometown. Not long after that, I landed a really good job, one that paid surprisingly well. And then one day I got a phone call. From my mom. Yeah, my mom. The same woman who hadn't spoken to me since the day they threw me out. It completely caught me off guard. I was sitting in my apartment room at the time, reviewing notes for a paper, when my phone suddenly buzzed. When I looked down and saw her name on the screen, I honestly thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I just stared at it while my thoughts raced. Should I answer it? Should I ignore it? After everything that had happened, why would she suddenly call me now? I let the phone ring a few more times. Then, against my better judgment, I answered. Hello, I said, trying to sound calm even though my heart was pounding. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, like she didn't know how to begin. Finally, she spoke. Hi, it's your mother. Well, no kidding. Who else would it be? Of course, I didn't say that out loud. I just stayed quiet and waited to hear why she was calling after almost 2 years of silence. She hesitated again. Then, completely out of nowhere, she said something that made my stomach tighten. We need to talk. I couldn't stop myself from letting out a sarcastic scoff. Now she suddenly wanted to talk? After everything that had happened? That was so typical of her. Still, even though I was irritated, a small part of me was curious. What could possibly be so important that she decided to reach out after all this time? About what? I asked, keeping my voice as calm and neutral as I could manage. Well, your father and we'd like to see you, she said, stumbling over her words like she was trying to figure out the right way to say it. Right away, I could already see where this conversation was heading. They weren't calling because they suddenly missed me or felt guilty about throwing me out. No, there had to be something they needed, and I had a pretty good guess what that something was. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long sigh. Why? I asked bluntly. She didn't answer immediately, which pretty much confirmed what I was thinking. When she finally spoke again, her voice softened, like she was trying to sound caring and motherly. Your dad and we've been going through a difficult time lately. Things haven't really been the same since the pandemic. There it was. The real reason for the call. Exactly what I expected. Money problems. I hadn't kept up with their business since the day I left, but I had heard bits and pieces. Margaret had casually mentioned once that their shop wasn't doing nearly as well as they had hoped. And after everything that happened during the pandemic, it wasn't hard to imagine they were struggling. But there was no way I was going to rush in and save them. Not after everything they had done. Okay, and I replied flatly. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. Well, your sister, Vanessa, she's been managing things for us. But she started to explain. That's when I cut her off. Let me guess, I said, already knowing exactly where this was going. Vanessa messed everything up? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. That silence told me everything I needed to know. Of course, Vanessa had screwed things up. Honestly, I wasn't surprised at all. She had always been more focused on appearances than on actually putting in the work. My parents had trusted her with everything, and now it was blowing up in their faces. My mom let out a shaky sigh. Things haven't worked out the way we hoped, she admitted quietly. And we need help. I laughed. I couldn't help it. After everything they had done, throwing me out, cutting me off, letting Vanessa walk all over me. They were now calling to ask for my help? The nerve of it was unbelievable. Unbelievable, I muttered under my breath. What's so funny? My mom asked, sounding honestly confused, like she couldn't understand why I wasn't eager to come rescue them. You're serious right now? I said, my voice starting to rise. You actually think I'm going to help you? I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me. All the frustration I had buried over the past 2 years was suddenly rushing back to the surface. We're your parents, she said, her voice trembling slightly. We made mistakes, but we need you. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. You didn't just make a mistake, Mom, I said firmly. You kicked me out of the house. You believed Vanessa's lies instead of trusting your own son. I paused for a moment before continuing. You didn't talk to me for years, and now that you need something from me, suddenly I'm supposed to forget everything and come running? The line went quiet again. I could tell she didn't know what to say. She probably wasn't used to hearing me talk back like that. Back when I still lived at home, I would have just gone along with whatever they wanted, hoping it would keep the peace. But that version of me was gone. I had changed, and I wasn't going to let them treat me like that again. Finally, she spoke, but this time her tone was completely different. The fake softness was gone. Now she sounded irritated. We're still your family, she said sharply. You owe us that much. That was it. That was the moment my patience ran out. I didn't owe them anything. If anything, they owed me. An apology would have been a good place to start, but I wasn't expecting one anytime soon. I don't owe you a damn thing, I replied coldly. If you need help, go ask Vanessa. She's your golden child, remember? Before she could say anything else, I ended the call. My heart was racing and my hands were shaking. But at the same time, I felt this strange sense of relief wash over me. For the first time, I had actually said everything I needed to say. They could deal with their problems themselves. I wasn't getting dragged back into that mess. Later that night, I called Aunt Margaret and told her about the conversation. She wasn't surprised at all. They've been relying on Vanessa for years, she said calmly. Eventually, it was going to catch up with them. We talked for a while, and by the time we hung up, I felt even more confident that I had made the right choice. My parents had chosen Vanessa over me. Now they were living with the consequences of that decision. It might sound harsh, but fixing their problems wasn't my responsibility. For the first time in a long while, I actually felt free. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had built my own life, and I wasn't going to let them drag me back into their toxic chaos. I had already survived their betrayal. Now it was their turn to deal with the fallout. Update 1. After that phone call with my mom, I really thought the whole family drama was finally over. Honestly, I felt pretty good about how the conversation went. For the first time in my life, I had stood up for myself and made it clear that I wasn't going to be their emergency backup plan. I figured they would eventually give up and go back to relying on Vanessa. But I seriously underestimated my sister's talent for stirring up trouble. Because of course Vanessa wasn't going to let things end that easily. About 2 weeks after that call with my mom, something strange happened. It was a normal Saturday afternoon. I was just cleaning up around my place, doing the usual weekend stuff, when suddenly I heard someone knock on my door. Now, I don't get many unexpected visitors. I live alone, and my friends usually text before stopping by. So naturally, I was a little confused. I walked over and looked through the peephole. And guess who was standing outside? Yep, Vanessa. For a moment, I honestly thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. What the hell was she doing here? She hadn't spoken to me in years, aside from that stupid text about my laptop. And now she was standing outside my door like everything between us was perfectly normal. My first instinct was to just ignore her completely. But I know Vanessa, and I know how stubborn she can be. She wasn't the type to leave until she got what she wanted. So I opened the door. Before I could even say a word, she flashed me a big smile. The kind of fake smile you give someone when you're pretending everything's fine. Hey, she said in an overly cheerful voice. Wow, it's been a while. I just stared at her for a moment, completely caught off guard. Yeah, I said slowly. It has. I narrowed my eyes at her. So what exactly are you doing here, Vanessa? She gave me this overly sweet look, like she thought she could just charm her way back into my life. I wanted to talk, she said, tilting her head slightly. Can I come in? I crossed my arms and stayed right where I was, blocking the doorway. About what? I asked, doing my best to keep my voice calm and neutral. For a split second her smile slipped, but she quickly pulled herself together. Come on, she said. Can we just talk inside? It's important. Honestly, I should have told her no right then and there. I should have just shut the door and sent her on her way. But my curiosity got the better of me. So I stepped aside and let her walk in, even though I made zero effort to make her feel welcome. I didn't offer her a chair. I didn't ask if she wanted something to drink. The truth was, she was lucky I even opened the door after everything she had done. Vanessa stepped into the apartment and slowly looked around, like she was sizing up the place. Nice apartment, she said casually, trying to make small talk. I didn't answer. I wasn't interested in polite conversation. All right, Vanessa, I said, cutting straight to the point. What do you want? She let out this dramatic sigh, like she was already worn out from the conversation. Mom told me about your phone call, she said, crossing her arms. She's pretty upset, you know. I raised an eyebrow. Upset? I said. She kicked me out of the house, Vanessa. What exactly does she have to be upset about? Vanessa rolled her eyes like I was the one being unreasonable. Look, I'm not here to go over all that again, she said dismissively. We both know you've always been difficult. I almost laughed at how casually she said it. Difficult? I repeated. Are you serious right now? You literally faked emails to get me thrown out of the house. And somehow I'm the difficult one? She waved her hand like the whole thing didn't matter anymore. That's ancient history, she said. I came here because I want to make things right. I blinked, not entirely sure I had heard her correctly. You want to make things right? I asked, letting all my skepticism show. Yeah, she replied, nodding like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. I know things got messy with the family, and maybe I overreacted back then, but I think it's time we move past all of that. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You think you overreacted? I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. Vanessa, you destroyed my relationship with our parents. You lied about me. You manipulated them. And now you're standing here acting like none of that matters? Her smile faded slightly, and I could tell she was starting to lose patience. Look, I didn't come here to argue, she said. I came because I need your help. And there it was. The real reason she had shown up. Of course, Vanessa wasn't here to apologize. She wasn't here to fix anything. She needed something from me. I felt my jaw tighten as I waited for her to keep talking. I've been trying to keep the business running, she admitted, dropping the fake sweetness in her voice. But it's been really tough. She sighed before continuing. The pandemic hit us hard. I'm doing everything I can, but it's just not enough. Mom and Dad don't want to admit it, but we're pretty close to losing everything. I crossed my arms, feeling absolutely no sympathy. So let me guess, I said. You want me to bail you out? Vanessa shifted awkwardly. I'm not asking for a handout, she said quickly. I just thought maybe we could. I don't know, figure something out together. She looked at me hopefully. You're doing pretty well for yourself now, right? I figured you'd want to help the family. I stared at her in disbelief. She was actually trying to guilt-trip me into saving the family business she had driven straight into the ground. You figured wrong, I said flatly. Vanessa blinked, clearly caught off guard. Wait, what do you mean? I mean, I'm not helping you, I said firmly. Not after everything you did. I took a step closer. You ruined my life, Vanessa. You turned my own parents against me. And now that you're the one in trouble, you expect me to forget all of that and swoop in to save you? No. She just stared at me. For the first time in her life, Vanessa seemed completely speechless. But we're family, she said weakly, her confidence starting to fade. I shook my head slowly. We stopped being family the day you decided to destroy me. Her face went pale. Vanessa wasn't used to hearing the word no, and I could see she had no idea how to handle it. After a long, uncomfortable silence, she stood up. Fine, she said coldly. If that's how you want it. That's exactly how it's going to be, I replied, standing my ground. You made your choices, Vanessa. Now you get to live with the consequences. Without saying another word, she stormed out of my apartment and slammed the door behind her. I stood there for a moment, letting the tension slowly drain out of my body. For a second I felt a tiny bit guilty, like maybe I had been too harsh. But then I remembered everything she had done to me. That feeling disappeared pretty quickly. For the first time in years, I felt like I actually had control over my life again. I wasn't living in Vanessa's shadow anymore. I wasn't the backup child, the scapegoat, the afterthought. I was finally free from all of it. Update 2. After Vanessa stormed out of my apartment, I honestly thought things would finally calm down. I figured she had gotten the message that I was done with her, and with the whole family mess. But of course, I underestimated just how stubborn my sister could be. It wasn't even a full week later before the next round of drama started. And this time it wasn't Vanessa showing up at my door. It was both of my parents. Again, it was a Saturday. Funny how these kinds of things always seem to happen on your day off. I was sitting on my couch scrolling through my phone when suddenly someone knocked on the door. And it wasn't a gentle knock either. It was loud and persistent, the kind that tells you whoever's outside isn't planning on leaving anytime soon. I got up, already having a pretty good feeling about who it might be. When I opened the door, there they were, my mom and dad, standing together like they were presenting some kind of united front. My dad looked uncomfortable, like he didn't really want to be there. But my mom? She had that determined look in her eyes, the one that meant she had already decided how things were going to go. I sighed and leaned against the doorframe. What do you want? I asked. My mom forced a strained smile, trying to sound friendly. Can we come in and talk? She said. We need to sort a few things out. Part of me really wanted to slam the door right in their faces. But I also knew that if I didn't deal with this now, they'd probably just keep showing up. So with an exaggerated sigh, I stepped aside and let them come in. They walked inside and glanced around my apartment like they were expecting something fancier than a simple place. My dad stayed quiet. My mom, on the other hand, walked straight over to the couch and sat down. Then she patted the seat next to her like she was trying to comfort a little kid. "I'll stand," I said flatly, crossing my arms. "All right," she replied, forcing a tight smile. "Look," my mom started, trying to sound calm. "We know things between us have been difficult." "Difficult," I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "That's the word you're going with." My dad finally spoke, his voice rough and low. "We didn't come here to argue." "Then why are you here?" I shot back, not bothering to hide my frustration anymore. "Because I'm pretty sure we already went through all of this." I gestured toward the door. "Vanessa already tried." "You already tried." And I made it perfectly clear. "I'm not helping." My mom's smile faltered for a moment. She clearly wasn't used to me talking to them like this. "That's not why we're here," she said, leaning forward a little. "We're here because we want to apologize." I almost laughed out loud. "Apologize?" I said. "For what exactly? Throwing me out of the house? Believing Vanessa's lies? Or maybe the part where neither of you bothered to check on me for 2 years?" My mom's face tightened instantly, and my dad shifted in his seat like he'd rather be anywhere else but sitting in my apartment right now. It was obvious they weren't expecting me to throw everything back in their faces. "We know we made mistakes," my mom said more quietly this time. "But we're family, and family is supposed to stick together." I could already feel my patience running out. This was the same line they always used. Anytime something went wrong, they'd pull out the whole "family sticks together" speech like it magically erased everything they'd done. But that wasn't going to work on me anymore. "You're only here because you need something," I said bluntly. "If your business hadn't fallen apart, I doubt I'd ever hear from you again." I shrugged slightly. "So let's stop pretending this visit is about family." For a moment the room went completely silent. Then my dad spoke again. His voice sounded rough, but it carried more honesty than anything I'd heard from him in years. "You're right." That caught me completely off guard. I blinked at him. "What?" "You're right," he repeated with a heavy sigh. "We messed up. We believed Vanessa. We pushed you out of the house without even thinking about it." He rubbed his face tiredly. "And now, everything's falling apart, and we're desperate." I honestly didn't know how to respond to that. I hadn't expected him to admit it so openly. My mom, though, looked like she was barely holding herself together. It was obvious she hadn't planned for him to just spill everything like that. "Well," I finally said after a long pause, "I appreciate the honesty." I shook my head slowly. "But that doesn't change anything." My mom jumped in immediately, her voice sharper now. "It doesn't change the fact that we need you," she snapped. "And you owe us after everything we've done for you." And there it was again. That same sense of entitlement. They truly believed I owed them something simply because they were my parents. Like all those years of neglect, favoritism, and betrayal didn't count for anything. Now that they were in trouble, they expected me to swoop in and fix everything. "I don't owe you anything," I said coldly. "Not after the way you treated me." I took a breath before continuing. "You made your choice when you believed Vanessa instead of me. When you threw me out of the house. When you didn't even bother to check if I was okay." I met their eyes. "And now you expect me to save you? That's not how this works." My dad didn't say a word. He just sat there staring down at the floor like he was ashamed. But my mom wasn't finished. "We're your parents," she said, her voice rising. "We raised you. We took care of you. And now you're just going to abandon us?" I shook my head slowly, almost feeling sorry for her at that point. "You didn't take care of me," I said quietly. "Aunt Margaret did." I gestured toward the door. "You chose Vanessa. Now you're stuck with her. That's your decision, not mine." My mom looked like she was about to explode, but my dad reached over and put a hand on her arm before she could say anything else. He stood up and looked me in the eye for the first time since they walked in. "We understand," he said, his voice steady but tired. "We're not going to push you anymore." He paused. "We just needed to try." For a brief second, I almost felt bad for him. But then the memories of everything they had done came rushing back, and that sympathy disappeared. "I hope things work out for you," I said as I walked to the door and opened it for them. "But I'm not getting involved." My dad nodded slowly, like he had expected that answer all along. My mom gave me one last look before leaving, part anger, part desperation. But when she realized I wasn't going to change my mind, she followed my dad out without another word. Once they were gone, I closed the door and stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. I had done it. I had finally stood up to them. And for the first time in my life, it truly felt like I was free.